I want to welcome everybody to the Guerrilla Lit Reading Series. This is our last event of the season, hopefully our last Zoom one. We are looking forward to hopefully being back at Dixon Place in the fall. But this has also been kind of cool for the last year and change that we've done this, because it's allowed, I think, people who live far and wide to A, be the authors that show up, or B, be the viewers that show up as well. So it's been nice to have this kind of extra, I think, community. And let's get to it. Nobody wants to hear me talk. So our first author is Leila Rafei. She is the author of Spring. Her writing has appeared in news outlets, including DC Magazine, Muftah, and Mondoweiss. She grew up in the Washington, DC area, and came of age in Cairo, Egypt. She now lives in New York, where she works in communications at the ACLU. Please give a warm welcome to Leila.
Thank you. It's always awkward hearing your bio read back to you. Anyway, so no offense to the bio. I wrote it, so I should be more comfortable with it, but no. So, okay, my book is called Spring. It is inspired by the Arab Spring, specifically the Egyptian Revolution in 2011. It's about three people that are living in Cairo or near Cairo around that time. It centers on a story about a young man named Sammy and a personal relationship of his, and trying to deal with kind of balancing the different expectations of him with his family. And it basically touches on a lot of themes, I think, that just parallel the political atmosphere at the time. So yeah, I guess I'll start. This is the first chapter. And I should add that in the story, there are 18 chapters, one for each day of the revolution, because it took 18 days for President Mubarak to step down back in 2011. So this is chapter 1, the first day of the revolution. In Egypt, it was called National Police Day. That was like the holiday that it was originally supposed to be. And the protesters kind of like co-opted it for the uprising, because obviously there were a lot of issues with the police, like there are here. But okay, so to begin, there was no good reason to live in Ramses. It was a bad part of town by the train tracks, where more people squatted on rooftops than lived inside its decaying buildings. Sammy knew that, Rose knew that. It was the source of many arguments before signing the lease. But for Sammy, the one selling point was that the apartment building, dubbed the Diesel on account of a defunct mechanic's sign hanging over its entrance, which conveniently matched the smell in the air, lacked a doorman. Sammy was well aware that was an unpopular take on what was supposed to be an amenity. In Cairo, nearly every residential building came with its own little watchman, usually an upper Egyptian dressed in bell-shaped galabeah, who lived in the entryway and policed comings and goings far better than any uniformed guard. But that was the thing. Doormen knew too much. They knew all about each tenant, including their guests and lovers, which was a problem for Sammy, who lived with a girlfriend nobody was supposed to know about. That Rose was a foreigner made it even worse. In a place like Ramses, she stuck out like a fluorescent beacon of denim and bare hair. No amount of lying or window climbing would help them hide, and not even a late night order of koshery would pass the threshold uninspected and unjudged. Who cares, Rose would say. What's he going to do, arrest us? Come to think of it, Sammy would rather get tossed into a police truck and hauled off to some dungeon in Torah prison, never to be seen again, than have word get back to his mother. He could practically hear her gasp, slap her hands against her face in horror. Sammy with a girlfriend, a foreigner at that, living together just the same as they would in, say, Paris. What do you think this is, Paris? She always said that whenever he did anything she might call decadent or on the verge of, God forbid, gay. She was right, though. This wasn't Paris, this was Cairo. And if he wasn't going to live accordingly, then he should at least fake it. Tonight, Sammy came ready. It was the middle of the night on a Tuesday. At the foot of the Diesel, he stood under its namesake sign with half its letters burnt out, looking for Abu Ali, who ran the 24-hour pharmacy next door. But the man wasn't there for perhaps the first time ever. Go figure, the one time Sammy needed him. They hadn't realized when they moved in that the lack of a doorman didn't preclude watchful eyes, specifically those of Abu Ali, who was always there, sipping tea from a stool on the curb between customers, watching, like every pair of headlights on the street. Sammy was certain Abu Ali knew about him and Rose, and yet nevertheless, he would never fess up to being there on her behalf, searching for medicine to soothe the nausea that bent her over the toilet every hour or so. Rose, who's that? As if the man hadn't seen Sammy enter the building with her each night, only to reappear the next morning. Instead, Sammy would divert the pharmacist's attention with a curveball. He would say his mother was in town, that she'd fallen ill on account of, say, the smog, and just hope that Abu Ali wouldn't ask to meet her, perhaps to get a taste of her famous lemon mint juice, of which Sammy had regretfully spoken on many occasions, drumming up some conversation in the excruciating window between payment and change. He had it all figured out until he ran smack into its shut door. When Sammy gave up knocking, he peered through the dirty window to confirm the pharmacy's nonsensical closure. The lights remained off, no flicker of fluorescence re-engaging. Abu Ali's wooden chair sat upside down on the counter, his prayer rug folded beside it. On the latter, 2 indentations marked the imprint of his knees. They stared back at Sammy through the window like his ghost, a taunting djinn standing between him and the medicine he needed, which was painfully plentiful on the shelves overhead. Even through the muck and the darkness, he could make out boxes and bottles of unpronounceable elixirs, all organized by ailment. Cold and flu, nausea and diarrhea, fever and parasites, bacterial infection, pediatrics. His eyes darted back to the counter, where at last he found the anti-nausea tablets he was after and stared longingly from the other side of the glass. Abu Ali's absence wasn't the only oddity that night. As Sammy turned to leave, he froze. He had been in such a rush to get to the pharmacy and get it over with that he hadn't even realized the whole boulevard was utterly empty, and that there was a police truck parked across the intersection, the latter cordoned off with a rope. What was happening? All he could think of was that it was National Police Day, though it was pretty meaningless holiday that usually came and went without notice and certainly didn't warrant closure of a major thoroughfare like Ramses. He stepped forth slowly, as if some explanation might leap from the curb at the last moment, but nothing did. He was sure Abu Ali would have known if only he were there that night. Sighing, Sammy looked back at the pharmacy's door again. It was still closed. The police truck remained parked in the street, listless, and any officers inside were surely asleep, as he should be too. He yawned and made his way back to the diesel, following that half-burnt sign like a decrepit North Star home. Empty-handed, Sammy returned to apartment 702 to find Rose on the couch with her legs draped over the arm, the TV blaring before her. The news was on, talking about some man who'd set himself on fire on the steps of Parliament today, the latest in a string of copycat suicides. Only this one had survived. Now he lay in a full-body cast in Qasr Al Aini Hospital, where Mr. TV was broadcasting live from room 251B. "Come watch," said Rose from the couch, as if Sammy had a choice. He took off his shoes and set them by the door, beside Rose's beat-up boots and the maid's paper-thin slippers, then joined her. Up close, he noticed the gray cast to her skin, her eyes glowing like venom against it. He'd say she was beautiful, but it seemed callous given her state, not to mention the sad display on TV, like kissing at a gravesite, distasteful. Know why he did it? Another protest? Sammy reached for a cigarette, then stopped himself as he looked back at the TV. Self-immolation had become a sort of trend nowadays. So common, it was no longer shocking, and in fact, seemed a more reasonable method of protest with each day, each nameless nobody that became a martyr because of it. He assumed that was the intention, and to become a martyr. Well, duh, but you'll never guess what he was protesting. Parking ticket, electric bill, rotten fruit, same old. No, she said, trying to maintain her pep despite the increasing pallor of her face. Bread, the guy couldn't afford it. Not even Fino, the cheap kind with bits of sand baked in. Crunchy. Anyway, the news is saying that his local bakery in Imbaba jacked up the price unfairly, but they're skirting around the real issue, the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room? I mean, they're ignoring the facts that Fino is government bread, Bakers can resell it for whatever they want, but when there's a subsidy cut like there was this last year, the price inevitably goes up. That's why the guy couldn't afford bread. So he'll go on a diet, cut carbs. She rolled her eyes. Not funny. I knew that was coming. Sorry. He is like fiddling around in the background. Anyway, sorry. She rolled her eyes. Not funny. Sammy didn't get it. He was just trying to make her laugh at a story that was almost comical in its absurdity. He looked at his sorry, 1 second. He looked at his petrochemistry textbook on the coffee table, regretting choosing a field of study that taught him nothing of how to understand Rose. It wasn't the first time she confused him. She never had any desire to live in nicer parts of town, like Zamalek, for instance, where foreigners like her were supposed to live in grand villas rented cheap with American dollars. There, buildings were named for flowers and French dignitaries rather than, say, gasoline. But Rose didn't care that Ramses was the industrial armpit of downtown. To her, that's what made it real, just a brush of the shoulder from so-called real Egyptians, the sort who might set themselves on fire over bread. I've been researching this stuff all day, she said, reading from her phone. In the 1960s, self-immolation was a practice among Buddhist monks. Do you know what those are? Yes, he nodded, obviously. Okay, well, Buddhist monks self-immolated to protest persecution by the Diem regime in South Vietnam. The most famous was, sorry, I should have figured out how to pronounce this name. Sorry, my dog, who burned himself in the middle of an intersection in Saigon. A bunch of other monks followed, and then eventually the regime fell. She set down the phone and looked back at him. A hint of amusement counteracted the nausea for a moment. Isn't that neat? Neat probably wasn't the way he'd describe it. And get this, the only part of that first monk, Mr. Duck or whatever, that didn't burn was his heart. Even after they tried to cremate him for the funeral, his heart just wouldn't burn. Yeah, right. He reached for her phone to read for himself. Indeed, the heart remained unburned, and now he lived in a glass case in a shrine in Ho Chi Minh City. Rose gave him an "I told you so" look as he snatched her phone back. Now the monk is what they call a bodhisattva. That's a kind of martyr, the Buddhist Buazizi, if you will. Sammy, I'm sorry, can you hold on 1 second? Sorry. Sammy sank into the couch. Its cushion swallowed him like the jaws of some brocade beast. The man, the body cast, like the other self-immolators as of late, had copied a Tunisian fruit vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi, who last month had instigated the fall of the Ben Ali regime with his own self-immolation. But today's burning was interrupted when tanks rolled in and put out the fire with a water cannon, just in time to save the would-be martyr. Now he was about to meet the president on live TV. In silence, they watched the president walk into the room in his trademark black suit. Rose turned up the volume. Sammy leaned forward, mouth slack. The president was stiff and deep voiced, solemn to match the scene. Sammy couldn't tell whether it was all in affect out of respect for the man in the body cast, perhaps a nod to the funeral that should have been. The guy might as well be dead anyway. His only sign of life was a straw dangling from the hole for his mouth, and it was unclear whether he was aware of the camera crew beside him, let alone the president, who proceeded to take his great white plaster mitt in his both hands and kiss it. Cameras flashed. Sammy flinched. Rose leapt from the couch and ran into the bathroom. Not again. He got up and found her heaving into the toilet bowl, as expected. She'd been getting sick often lately due to that terrible thing inside her, but he still didn't know quite how to help. What could he possibly help? When he got sick as a kid, his mother would squeeze a lemon wedge into a cup of hot water to cleanse the stomach, but their kitchen was empty. No cup of hot water to cleanse the stomach. I'm sorry. No lemons, no medicine, thanks to the closure of Abu Ali's pharmacy, as well as the whole street. All he had were dumb jokes to make her feel better and to distract from the real reason she was sick. Have you been eating tiramisu again? He always teased her for loving the salted beans, which she bought eagerly from off toothless vendors in the street, despite his warnings. You'll get sick. You don't know where the hand's been. The only people who eat that stuff are, poor. She never cared, nor did she care now, as she remained face first in porcelain, ignoring the half-assed attempt for a laugh. Ah, so it must be good old tap water. Again, no response. Well, you know what they say, once you drink from the Nile, you're destined to return. He thought of the line, an old cliche beaten to death by every song, book, and film any love-struck traveler ever made about Egypt. Would elicit at least a half smile, a wink between heaves, but her face was buried so deep inside the toilet bowl that it was impossible to tell. Finally, Rose lifted her head and asked for water. Sammy twisted off the cap of a fresh bottle and handed it to her, watching her down the entire contents in a single gulp. She looked terrible, skin a slick gray like the belly of a fish, hair stuck to her face, making involuntary sounds so guttural it was hard to believe they'd come from a human. Don't make me take you to Casa El Aini. You're in no shape to meet the president. At this, she rolled her eyes. There was life. Feeling somehow satisfied, he helped her up and walked her into the bedroom where he lay her down to sleep. And I will stop there before my dog destroys whatever it is in my apartment that he's eating, but sorry about that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila.
Sure, no
What
problem.
kind of dog is it?
Yeah, he's making himself heard. Sorry.
Good reader too, you can't blame.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much, and thanks again for showing up tonight as well and being a reader. Our next reader of the night is Jeff W. Benz. He is the author of the novels Albert Himself and The Mighty Oak, a Publisher's Weekly Book of the Week, and a long-form pick of the week. His short fiction and essays are published widely. A founding member of the School of Filmmaking at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, Ben currently directs the undergraduate creative writing program at Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York. Please welcome Jeff.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Leila. Keisha, looking forward to what you're going to share with us. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Marco. Thanks, Guerrilla. I appreciate being here. And thanks to Blackstone, too, who coincidentally put out Leila's book and my book. They're a really cool indie press that I would recommend to you. And of course, to Dixon Place. So I'm going to read the first chapter, which sets up the book, certainly, is not necessarily indicative of the pace and kind of what the rest of the book is consistently about. I say that I think the book is a book about, hopefully, about perseverance and like the potential of hard-won hope, of mercy, maybe even. Whether our main character, Tim O'Connor, can ever see his life clearly, whether he can envision another life for himself. So I say all that because the first chapter, I give a little content warning, establishes the world where we pick him up as a skating goon in a very, very minor league, hockey league in West Texas. The end of this chapter, he'll go home to Boston for his mother's funeral, suspended from the league. And what we just talked about is what he'll have to see if he can even comprehend exploring a new life. This is a guy who is addicted and potentially has CTE, which is something we can talk about if people are interested afterwards. So with that little content warning, I give you the first chapter of The Mighty Oak. Now, when his sister Arlene called from Boston to say their mother was dead, Oak was in an ice bath halfway through a 12-pack of beer in the middle of the Texas afternoon, trying to concentrate on how he was going to knock Pat McDonald's head in. Outside his apartment, the El Paso sun blazed. Inside, he had the apartment lights off as he kept them against the wavering sickness in his head. He hadn't slept again. He hasn't slept much since the headaches that crept in over the summer, his hip and lumbar throbbing in their marrow. His ma wasn't supposed to be dead. When Oak talked to her in July, 3 months ago, she said she was better, that her cancer was on the run. Out the team bus window, a cattle truck rattles his head. The El Paso Storm bus rolls north through the Chihuahuan Desert on the way to the Albuquerque, New Mexico rink at the far northern edge of the West Texas Hockey League. Oak sits alone in the seat at the back of the bus with the other veteran players. The boys are playing cards, they're on their phones. The bus smells of sweat, icy hot, booze breath, and beer farts. Oak takes a drink from the roadie he's got between his knees. He's got a seat reserved on a 4 a.m. Greyhound back from Albuquerque to El Paso and a ticket for a flight from El Paso to Logan for tomorrow afternoon, for after he knocked Pat Sandman McDonald's head off. Oak examines his right fist. He locates the first knuckle of his right index finger down near the middle of his palm. He works the knuckle toward the base of his finger, sets it more or less back into place. He's got nothing against Pat McDonald. The Albuquerque defenseman is 22, is making a name for himself. Oak understands this, but he's going to do it. He has to do it, even though McDonald tomahawked Ken Grimes' neck with his stick last spring when Oak wasn't even skating, when Oak was collapsed out in his shitty El Paso apartment with his spinning head and his stitched up post-surgery lumbar spine. Kept meaning to get back to Boston, from Texas, from Florida, where he was before Texas. He hasn't seen his daughter, Kate. He's ashamed that it'll take his own mother's funeral for him to see his daughter, to see Kate for the first time in 4 years. Kate was 10, and now she is 14. Oak was 10, and now he is 32. Oak looks back out the bus window at Texas. The sunlight slashes through the gap between his sunglasses and his face. He squeezes his eyes shut again. He hears the blood ringing in his brain. He just needs ice time to get out of Texas and back up a league, and then up another league, up to where he belongs. Oak gets the plastic pill bottle from the pocket of his sweats. He needs 6 Oxy 40s a day to get the job done with Dexy or Adderall. The team doctor cycles him through Vicodin and Tramadol with Ativan and Ambien. Oak pays for the Oxy and the Dexedrine. He's always had headaches, but last February they had started to mess up his brain. The pills help. He remembers the game when he first really zeroed out 2 years ago in Florida. Nothing really bad had happened. He hadn't even fought. He took a blindside hit from some goon, and then it was an hour later and the game was over. Oak was dressing at his locker when he came to. He's had his bell rung too many times to remember, drifted 10 minutes here and there on the bench, but he always came to, drank some water, headbutted the boards to wake himself back up. But that time, in the Florida locker room, when he woke to see his teammates doing their usual shit, laughing so he knew they must have won the game, he remembers the smell of rotting fruit. And then he fell against the dressing room bench and puked on the carpet, the boys giving him shit like he was hungover. He shoved a smile on his face, getting to the toilet stall where he sat for he can't remember how long, steadying his brain in his busted up hands. He spaces the Oxy out, eats them in bursts before games. His soft head led to his busted back. His busted back led to more pills. He knows it. He's read about it. Addiction, CTE. He's not going down that path over the Mexican border with a Pringles can of pills. But the team doctor and dentist are scaling him back, so he's paying premium. He no longer gives a shit what he looks like in the practices. He knows he just needs to get his body back in order, his head straightened out. He doesn't even want to take the shit anymore. But if he doesn't, then he can't sleep, can't think, can't skate. He tries to remember to park his truck at the back right corner of parking lots. He writes down that he's eaten. He puts his keys and his phone on a table that he moved next to his apartment door so that he can always remember to take them. A semi bursts past the bus window. Oak washes the oxy down with the beer. "We're showmen, Oak," their coach Tom Bowie said to him 3 weeks ago on opening day when Oak fought his first fight since February, his first of 6 in the season's first 10 games, not counting the punch up last week in the team bar parking lot that their Melfi Long Island born wingers started and Oak had to finish. "No one wants to see you finessing a wrist shot, Oak." Maybe it's true, he thinks. On opening day, there were posters for him, flashing phones. The El Paso Storm crowd chanted his name. "He's back," the rink PA said, Oak watching himself overhead on the Jumbotron, delivering hit after hit, punch after punch for Texas, before that for Florida, for North Carolina in the ECHL, the crowd and him rising together. He's 15 in scoring, he's 20 in skating, he's 25 in falling, from the AHL to the ECHL. He's 32 and closing his eyes behind his shades on a Texas League bus to Albuquerque. He turns toward the bus window again, twists an Adderall 20 capsule and sucks the Addy up his nose. In his head, he sees pictures. His dead ma smoking at his games when he was a kid, his sister Arlene step dancing on St. Patty's float, his father in a black donkey coat standing by the MBTA trains. And there's Shannon and their baby, Kate, napping in his Providence College hockey house bed. His sister Arlene said Shannon and Kate will be at the funeral on Monday. Kate will be there when they lower his ma into the ground. There's a space break. The Albuquerque rink is old, steaming with bad air and wet ice. Banners for an MMA fight and a monster truck show hang from the rafters. Oak and his teammates skate on into a fog of booze. The Albuquerque fans pound the glass. They know what's coming. They want it. They've paid for it. Oak skates to the visitors' bench. He shouts over the boards to his coach, Tom Bowie, "Major Tom, you gonna let me skate today, Major?" Major Tom scratches his mustache, spits in the corner of the bench. His coach, his friend, they fished together. They used their sticks on the back nine in the Franklin Mountains, slapping golf balls out toward Juarez. "Just skate your game, Oak," Major yells back, not meeting Oak's eyes. The rink lights snap off. Oak steadies himself against the spots that swirl the ice. He swallows hard, jams his teeth together. He's sweating good now with what's in him, with what he is going to do to Pat McDonald. The spots spin across the ice, the PA growling, "Don't poke the bull if you don't want the horns," as the snorting, flag-waving mascot leads the Albuquerque team onto the ice, steam blasting from the mascot's plastic nose. Metallica's Enter Sandman shaking the arena's air. Oak looks for Pat McDonald. The Jumbotron flashes a montage of the Bulls scoring, hitting, and fighting. Oak opens and closes his gloved fists, shifts his weight from one skate to the other. Up above him, McDonald delivers a massive uppercut to some poor bender's strapless chin, a halo of sweat exploding from the poor guy's head. The image freezes. The crowd chants "Sandman" as the rink lights burn back on. A Coke sails down from the stands, hits Oak, ice and Coke running down his back. The Albuquerque crowd bunches near Pat McDonald, waving Sandman posters, snapping photos of McDonald with their phones. In person, Oak realizes McDonald is even bigger and dumber than he looks online. His head is like a cement block. Oak sucks in, blows out, pushes off from the boards. He loops behind their net and smacks his forehead against the corner glass. The fans think he's showboating. He does it again. Grinding his mouthpiece, he skates hard, small circles in the visitor's end. Later, he tells his body. He punches the boards to wake up his bleeding fists. He drives his knees into the air. "I'm still the boss of you," he's telling his body. He's telling his head. He's telling his sick, throbbing blood. He roars into speed. His teammates grin, stick slap him as he goes by, Grimesy nodding, Oak squeezing life from every cell he's got. He skates the center line. One of the Albuquerque guys says something to him about how he's done, about how he should go fuck his Texas boyfriend. Oak loops harder around their end. He's flying now, and he cuts over the center line just as McDonald loops by. Oak grabs the kid and spins him. He's not waiting on the national anthem. He's not waiting on the puck. He's peaking. In half an hour, his body will start its grinding collapse. Let's go, Oak says. Later, Pops, McDonald says. One of McDonald's front teeth is gone. Up close, Oak can see the baby fat on the kid's face. Now, Oak drops his gloves, hurls his helmet so that it smacks against the boards. For a split second, waiting on McDonald to drop, an unfamiliar thought flashes in the rising white roar inside Oak, that he doesn't have to fight, that he's a dog in a pit. In that flash, Oak lets McDonald's ham fist shoot past his right ear, and Oak straightens the kid with 3 quick blows, chin, nose, temple. McDonald shove hooks the side of Oak's head, Oak flashing into starburst. The blow is like a thrown brick. The crowd roar white tunnels into nothing, time slowing as McDonald tries to hook again, the silence spinning as the benches clear around them. Oak ducks, comes back up. McDonald clenches. Oak's been waiting on this. He studied McDonald's clench online. The kid always leaves a gap. Oak shoots a tight uppercut with his right fist into this gap between their 2 chests. McDonald's head snaps backward as Oak knew it would. McDonald's head floats there in front of Oak, a fat, dumb balloon. Oak draws the punch from his legs to his waist, to his shoulder, to his fist, and smashes it. McDonald falls silently into the whiteness, the guy's head bouncing off the ice. Oak times the bounce as the noise and color rush back in. He hurls a roundhouse to the side of McDonald's face, the force of his own punch bringing Oak to his knees. McDonald's head bursts into blood spurt. The roundhouse sends McDonald sliding, his bleeding face smearing the ice. McDonald balls up. The fights around them freeze. The ref gets in front of Oak, and suddenly the ref starts screaming for the rink doctor. Oak hears his own heart and breath. Cups rain down from the stands. Oak! Major Tom runs across the glove-littered rink. Oak! Oak sees his mother dead on her white tile bathroom floor. He sees his daughter, Kate, skating in white snow. Oak! There's a doctor in red sweats running behind Major Tom. Oak watches them, the doctor slipping on the ice, racing toward McDonald. McDonald lays motionless. Getting closer, Oak sees McDonald's bloodied face. And then he has to look again against what he thinks he is seeing, and it's there. McDonald's right eyeball is hanging wet and red from his shattered eye socket to the blood pool on the ice. The quiet explodes. 2 bulls jump Oak from behind, the blows on him like blocks thrown into black water. On the last page. Later, in the parking lot, with the delayed game starting, Oak looks up at the black Albuquerque sky. An ambulance took McDonald away. Oak knew better than to try to see him. Oak just walked up the ramp, and even the fans were quiet. He walked through that quiet and got his skates off and his pads, and he showered off the fight, his whole body shaking so that he had to sit down in the stall. He's still shaking in the parking lot, standing there shaking, when 3 guys come over, having left the game. There's kids in there, one guy says. You sick bastard. You may have killed the guy. When the biggest guy throws a punch, Oak takes it to the side of his face, and falling as he takes another punch, he lets the guys take their shots, their punches dissolving in the adrenaline that burns cold inside him. Looking up at the night sky from the Albuquerque parking lot, Oak can feel what they've done to his face and ribs. He can see it in the face of the smallest guy as they run. And he's lying on his back on Castle Island in Southie with his girlfriend Shannon, looking at the Boston stars. Kate still in that place for souls before they get ripped into life. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Our last reader of the night is Keisha Bush. She was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. She received her MFA in creative writing from the New School, New School, where she was a Riggio Honors Teaching Fellow and recipient of the NSPE Dean Scholarship. After a career in corporate finance and international development that brought her to live in Dakar, Senegal, she decided to focus full-time on writing. She lives in East Harlem, No Heaven for Good Boys is her debut novel. Please welcome Keisha.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Marco, Lee, Camila, Jeff, Leila, Deirdre, everyone who's shown up today. I really appreciate it. And so I'm reading from my debut novel, No Heaven for Good Boys. And just sort of like the elevator pitch, it's a modern day Oliver Twist story, but my Oliver is not an orphan, and he is African, Senegalese specifically, and Muslim. And his parents have begrudgingly agreed for him to go and learn the Quran at a Dara, which is a school of the Quran, with a teacher who, Ibrahima is the protagonist. He's supposed to, the boys are supposed to memorize the Quran. They're like disciples, almost like monks, a brotherhood. And it takes about 3 to 5 years to memorize the Quran. And for 2 to 3 hours a day, they should go out and beg. Instead, though, this practice is actually abused in Senegal, and the boys are forced to beg 12 to 16 hours a day. And I got to know clusters of them when I lived in Dakar. And when I returned back to the US, to New York City, I changed careers, and their story sort of just came bursting forth. And No Heaven for Good Boys is fiction, but the scaffolding is nonfiction. And so I'm going to read actually chapter 28. It's one of the later chapters that I added, and I really like it. And it's an example of the scaffolding. So the characters are fictional, but the neighborhood, the doctors, everything is actually nonfiction. And in general, what I did is I took the 4 years that I lived in West Africa, and I condensed them into a year that these fictional characters experience. The morning is slow, and the boredom of not having anything to do threatens to put Ibrahima back to sleep. It's nowhere near lunchtime yet when he and Etienne will go visit Mustafa. Now that their friend has returned to Dakar and school is on summer recess, they can visit for the entire afternoon, watching television, playing video games, learning to skateboard, eating good food, and practicing their English. All before Mustafa's father comes home from work, of course, which is when they take their leave so that he doesn't find them there. How much is Magic Land? He asks his cousin. That would be a good way to fill the morning, and with all the money that they have been collecting during the last 2 weeks of Ramadan, surely they can afford it. Too expensive. It's 2,500 francs. How much is that? Etienne ponders the question for several moments, counting silently on his fingers. A week's pay. Ibrahima's shoulders drop in defeat. He could justify 1 day's worth of Marabou's money, but not an entire week. But he deserves to spend a day at Magic Land after all he has to endure, or he has had to endure over the last few weeks. Are you sure? Maybe we should just try, Ibrahima says, hope still alive in the pit of his stomach. Why do you think no Taliban ever goes to Magic Land? Those rich people don't want to be anywhere near us. Even if we could afford it, they keep the price high to keep us out. Ibrahima knows his cousin is right. He rarely ever steers them wrong. Magic Land is stupid anyways, Etienne says. No, it's not, Ibrahima says. Etienne rolls his eyes and leaves Ibrahima to sulk alone. Even if he could earn that much money, he knows spending it on Magic Land would be a waste. Food and paying Marabou are his two priorities. He scratches at his arm and discovers a mosquito bite. His dirty fingernails scrape the bump until his skin burns. When he realizes Etienne is walking away, he jumps up to follow him. Ibrahima drags his can alongside his body, the empty canister bumping into his thigh. Where are we going? Ibrahima asks. We meet the others over there, Etienne says, pointing to the larger group of boys from their house. And then we go to the lighthouse. What's up there? Doctors who will fix our feet. Ibrahima looks down at his feet housed in the blue plastic jelly sandals Aria bought him. Why haven't we gone before? We never have the time. Are you going to get your feet fixed, Ibrahima says. I don't know, Etienne says, tilting his head to the side. It depends. On what? On how long they say it takes to heal. They catch up with the group, and Etienne slaps hands with fatigue, and the two boys fall into an easy gait. Ibrahima frowns. His feet were a constant thing of suffering for months. Etienne would try and soothe him with the advice that one day, once his toes healed and got hard, they wouldn't hurt and bleed so badly again. He didn't think the day would ever come, but it did. He would rather not do anything to cause that kind of pain again. A young girl walks past, dragging her feet in a gait of slow suffering beneath the scorching African sun and the effects of fasting. The ends of her cornrows stick up haphazardly around the crown of her head, offering no protection. She wears an old t-shirt tucked into her traditional Senegalese ankle-length wrap skirt and twirls a small black plastic bag that dangles from her wrist. Ibrahima would never think to ask her for money, as she is but a maid, a young girl pulled out of school to live with her family and work 7 days a week with a day and a half off once a month to visit her family in a village. Her entire salary of $30 a month is given to her family back in the village. So even if she did have a 5 franc piece to spare, she could not afford to give it to a Taliban. The older boys at the front of the group push one another in jest and turn around, their eyes watching her narrow hips sashay by like the older women with curves. A boy clicks his tongue at her, but with her chin jutting out, she continues on as if she had not heard. The boy's antics fall flat with Ibrahima. A girl with no money to spare, he does not see the fun in harassing her. Have you gone to the lighthouse before? Ibrahima asks Fatigue. Fatigue shakes his head no. He turns around and glances at the retreating girl. Why do they bother the girl? She has no money. They're not interested in her money, Etienne says. Then why do they tease her? Because they want her to be their girlfriend, Fatigue laughs. Ibrahim scrunches his face up in disgust. Yuck, I don't want a girlfriend. Fatigue shakes his head. You're young, wait till you get older. No, I'm fine, I don't need a girl, I just want my mama. A man dressed in a torn t-shirt and dusty workman's pants, both too large for his thin, angular frame, brushes by Ibrahima as if he were not there. Some people are not worth the time it takes to ask for money. He knows who will say no from several blocks away. People are not aware that the way they move, the manner in which they regard their surroundings, and their facial expressions say more about them than the words that come out of their mouths or the clothes they wear. There are days, though, when his feet hurt, his belly aches, and his skin is so hot from the merciless sun that he would approach a ram for food or money. But today, during the slow but abundant month of Ramadan, he can take a moment and look up at the faces and shoulders of the world around him. He always thought that what he really needed was a lot of money, but he has come to realize that what it is he truly needs is time. Time to find food to fill his belly, time to work, time to find his way back home, time to be a boy. Père de Mamel sits in front of the boys. The lighthouse is atop one of 2 looming hills covered in grass. The story told by the elders is that the twin hills are the remnants of a woman who threw herself into the sea off the coast of Dakar, only to be rejected by the sea gods, who tossed her back onto the land, which then grew over and around her. The lasting proof of her existence are the 2 hills said to be her breasts, which mark the beginning of the low-key residential neighborhood of Mamel. The group starts up the steep and winding hill, but Ibrahima finds his small chest has trouble catching enough wind to conquer the hill with ease. He stops for a moment, leans over, and coughs phlegm, then spits it out onto the ground in front of him. Are you okay? Fatigue asks, hitting him on the back. Etienne is beside him a moment later. Cousin, what's wrong? Ibrahima stands up and catches his breath. I don't know. I'm fine. Perhaps you need a drink. He is quite thirsty now that Etienne mentions it. A Coca-Cola will soothe his cough for sure. Come, Etienne says, taking his tomato can and leading him up the hill. We're almost there. Seagulls circle above the tall white lighthouse that looms above the city. Ibrahima shades his eyes against the glare of the sun to get a clear look at the structure. The doctors are here, Ibrahima asks. That is what the others told me, Etienne says. How would they fix our feet? Well, they cut the stuff that makes your toes connect and then bandage them separately. When you take the bandage off, your feet will be like normal again. I don't want anyone cutting my feet. The idea of someone cutting his toes causes the same fear he feels for Marabou to take hold of his body. Etienne touches his shoulder. Don't worry, you don't have to get it done. Will you do it? Ibrahima asks. Maybe. I think they give you special shoes so that you can walk. If I get new shoes, I will do it. Ibrahima is not excited about the idea of knives and feet, but before he is able to communicate his doubt, they are approached by a young Senegalese boy Etienne's height. Talibé, what are you looking for? The doctor that fixes Talibé feet. We heard they're here at the lighthouse, Fatigue says. Doctors Without Borders? You're too late. The doctors are gone. The group comes to a sudden halt. How do you know? Etienne asks. I live here. My father is one of the lighthouse watchers. Where did the doctors go? They went to Niger to help with the famine. Will they come back? Fatigue asks. I don't know. They left right before Ramadan, the boy says, then runs off behind them down the hill. Etienne plops down on the ground, kicks off his sandals, and stares at his bare feet, toes fused together beneath years' worth of calluses and ingrown toenails. Ibrahima sits down next to him and lies back onto the grass. The wind atop the hill brings him relief, and he plucks a blade of grass, covered in sea salt, carried along the ocean breeze, and chews on it. They were too late to get their feet fixed, but that is fine with Ibrahima, since he would rather spend the rest of his day thinking of all the things he would do if he had enough time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Keisha. I want to thank all of our readers, Leila, Jeff, and Keisha. What we've been doing at the end of Guerrillas is we have a Q&A. If you have any questions for any of our authors, please type it in the chat and I'll read it out to them, or you could just ask directly if you want to do it that way too. Or if not, we could discuss writing or whatever for pretty much what will be our last fingers crossed Zoom Guerrilla. So yeah, do not be shy. No question is a bad question. Right? Okay, here we go. From Jasmine, do any of you consider writing your stories as nonfiction?
I'll just jump in. I originally thought about that, and my very first draft, I wrote it in 2010. When I finally had readers, read it, they said that it read like journalism, and that I should choose. And I decided, and I love journalism, and journalism feeds a lot of my writing and science and different things. And this is a story based on nonfiction. But I'll be honest, as a fiction writer, I feel like nonfiction is so much work and like so much research, and fiction is such a great and beautiful vehicle to tell an authentic story, but to give you this kind of room and space to, I think, dive deeper into the characters. And for me, this book is told from Ibrahima, a Talibé's point of view, and also his mother's point of view back in the village. And so for me to have their different voices, and here there's 4 different POVs, I'll be honest, I was just lazy. I was like, I'm gonna do fiction.
There's like a freedom that comes along with fiction. You're not constrained to reality, basically, so you could take it in all these directions. I mean, I've never tried nonfiction before, so I can't even imagine the daunting aspect of that. So I hear you completely.
I want to ask Leila and Jeff, have you ever heard from nonfiction writers who say, you fiction writers, that's way too much work? And I think it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, it really is. I hate fact checking stuff. So a lot of times when I'm writing, I'll just like leave a blank where there should be a fact, or like the worst stuff is when I like mark something to check a fact later, and then through the revision process, forget where I was, and then somehow it winds up in like a final draft. I'm like, oh shit. But yeah, so I was gonna agree. Yeah, I find fiction way more honest actually than nonfiction, because it's more like you can you're not as self-conscious, I think. So I think that's why it's good. But
I think for me, I mean, this book took me actually 10 years to write. And I've got, I teach at college and I bring into the classroom sometimes. I've got those, those plastic tubs. You can't see how wide my arms are now. Those giant plastic tubs you might keep in your garage, or in your storage space or something. I got 3 of those, just filled with research, with interviews, with. So in that sense, I really wanted the book to read true to those in the sort of worlds that the book travels. So this it's as close to nonfiction as I could make it in a strange way, while still being fiction. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, this is from Vaughn. Vaughn asks, can you each talk a bit how you published your book? Do you all have agents, and did you enter contests for?
Yeah, I had an agent, and that was a part of the process that I didn't know was a part when I started writing it. And I'm glad I didn't know there were so many steps involved, because there are a lot, and the agent is usually the first step. So yeah, I was lucky enough to find one. My first agent was Christy Hunter for Spring. So yeah, I think she really helped like guide me in terms of like how to actually get it published, because I had no idea. I didn't enter any contests or never had anything other than like, fluffy articles published. So yeah.
For me, I also had an agent. When I started writing, I found writing classes. I knew that it was important to have outside eyes reading my work. So like, a professor and classmates. And, you don't always take everyone's advice. So I learned very quickly who to trust and then who to like just sort of ignore a little bit. I mean, I was polite to them, but in 2000, I forgot what year, 2012 maybe, I reached out to some agents and for Reddit, the very first draft, and the feedback was, great story, very authentic, but I didn't fall in love. So I was looking for the love factor, and I went back to New School, or I went to New School and took continuing education classes at night. And that's how I was introduced to like, sort of like the workshop style. And then I applied to grad school because I went to business school. So for me, it was also about community and networks. Like in business school, it is about your community. You change careers through building a network. And so I use school for that. Other people can use other things. I didn't apply to any contests, but I applied throughout the years from like 2015 to 2020 to, I don't know, when was the pandemic? It was last year. For like 4 years after graduating from my MFA program, I did a lot of artist residencies, and I stayed on the artist residency sort of circuit. And once you start doing them, it's easier to get into them. It's so weird. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. And so I sort of sacrificed and did that. And my agent sold the book, and that the publishing world is a whole nother, like, it's like a conference that should just be focused on that. 10 days for writers at every single level, like surviving the publishing process. But yeah, so that's a bit of my story.
I think if you've got a novel, if you've got a full book, I think an agent is helpful. It takes a while to find one because, of course, agents are inundated and they're already quite busy. But I think for me, it was useful to find someone, you know, who represented writers that I like, you know, so someone that whose kind of point of view I admire. And in fact, you know, that's why the agent was able to find Blackstone, for instance, you know, so because he knew that we might be simpatico. So I think that's, I think an agent can be important, yeah, but not just to have one. I mean, they're just people. I mean, you know, I think you got to find someone who you like and whose taste you like, you know, and then who's going to have the time for you too. There's a lot of agents whose taste I like, but I mean, you know, they're so far, they're so busy that it's not really worth me talking to them. So you have to kind of plan it, and it could take a while, you know, if you're looking for agents. I mean, it might take you 6 months or a year. I don't know, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all really good advice. And you know, writing a book itself is a daunting process. The business end of it is way worse. Like the writing process, I mean, to me at least, it's like, it's nice, it's pleasurable. And then the business end of it is the headache of it. But after a while, they start to kind of merge and you start to eventually kind of get good at both of them. And I think just to echo what everybody's, you know, if you're sending queries, if it's not working, once conferences start up again, those are good places to go to kind of network and potentially find an agent, you know, ask your other friends who are writers, recommendations. And, you know, and these days as a last resort, there's always self-publishing, you know, and to kind of kickstart your career. And then maybe an agent notices that book and it happens that way. So the world is bigger now, I think, in terms of having a chance of getting published. You know, and if you're good, I feel like, and you're dedicated to it happening, then, you know, there's avenues for it to happen. Okay, this is from Josephine. After 10 years of working on your books, at what point did you realize they were finished?
Oh, that's probably to me. Yeah, well, I would say that it's important. This would only be my process, but I think it's important to kind of write from one's kind of gut and one's heart, and not try to brain it out. So if I'm feeling my characters, they're kind of coming from me and I'm feeling them, I can know if I'm being authentic with them or if I'm kind of bullshitting it to try to move the pages along. So that makes it a slow process, but it also helps me to know that I'm still on track. So a short answer to that would be, you know, you can just kind of feel. I don't know if Leila and Keisha feel the same way, and others, but you can just kind of feel when the thing is landed, and it's kind of like, yeah, that thing landed finally. You know, didn't land the first time, but you know, it's like it finally landed, and I think it's authentic. So it doesn't mean people are going to like it, but I know that I can be like, well, that's basically what I feel will connect with whatever it was that was kind of calling me to write the book, if that makes sense.
So my first draft was written in 2010.
Oh, it did take you that long too, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience was my experience was very interesting. In 2014, so 2010 first draft, 2012, rewrote it from scratch. But this is with a writing professor at the New School, and I took 3 classes back to back over a year and a half and rewrote it. And John Reed, he was right there with me along the way.
John Reed's the best.
He really is. And so then when I entered the MFA program in 2013, I worked with Luis Jaramillo, who is the MFA director, the director of MFA program, and also a professor. And I worked specifically on the ending, because endings for me are really important. And as a new writer, I was just like, I'm really trying to get this ending right. I ended up finding my agent in 2014. So I wasn't sure if the book was ready, but it turns out it was. But my publishing experience has been a very long, excruciating somewhat experience over 7 years of me waiting for other people to sort of hold up their ends of the bargain. And I've been at Penguin Random House for 5 years, I think now. They acquired my book in 2016. The
Really?
very last big draft happened in 2017, but I languished, and I ended up at 3 different imprints. The first one was shuttered. The second, so I had 2 editors at the first one and shuttered, and they got fired. And then the second, my third, yeah.
Random House combined with Penguin? Did that kind of?
That didn't affect me. I came after they merged, but also the merging ended up, there were shutterings, like imprints being shuttered. And so then my second imprint, my editor there quit the entire industry. I was like, what does this mean? I'm like, can I follow you? And so then I was transferred again, and 2 editors got assigned to me in 2019. And I was at a point where I didn't want to give up as much as I wanted to give up until like the very end.
Yeah.
The writing process is the most amazing time. And I say go all in and just put the work in. But the publishing side of things, it's pretty tumultuous. And for an example, my contract is with Penguin Random House, who is the head. So it doesn't matter what editor I'm with or at what imprint. When that editor leaves, I don't leave with that editor because my contract is with the publishing house. Mm-hmm. And editors leave and change and get new jobs and get promoted all the time. So it's stressful as a writer to come in and have to deal with that. But community is so important because that's why I'm still here. My community.
I'm sorry. I think that's such a great point, and like writers have other writers' backs, and it's almost like you get it, so you understand, and everybody has gone through their own kind of horrific nightmare in terms of it. Yours is more than average, definitely, but it seems like now it kind of all came full circle.
It'll be a book one day.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I was going to add that, I agree. That's something that when I moved to New York, that's something I loved about living here was actually knowing people who are writers as well. Because where I lived in DC, which isn't even like, it's not like there aren't writers there are, but in terms of like people writing fiction, there just wasn't really a crowd there at all. So New York, it was just really, I did a writing workshop and I met some friends through there and we started our own workshop, and it's been so fun. And such a better experience, actually, just having people who are going through the same things with you, because it can be really discouraging. The process just takes so long and it's just never how you expect it's going to be. So it's good to have people who get it, because you don't really get it until you have been through it yourself. Like many things. But yeah, for me, I think like I didn't take that long to finish the first manuscript, but I think when I just realized I was finished was when I wasn't like mortified at the thought of it being printed and read, because I realized like with all my previous drafts, I was like, no, when I was trying to envision it. But yeah, when it doesn't make you cringe anymore, that could be a good sign.
We have a question from Karen. Karen asks, how much of your time is spent on marketing and promotion of your book? And I'm going to add one little part to that. How much is the publisher adding in their own publicity versus your publicity on your own?
Well, I'm terrible at self-promotion, so very little time for me. I can't really answer that question well.
I'll jump in. So I think for you, for everyone here with a book, I've learned about it. I'm learning more about it, like within your publisher and at the, like the big 5, it's a marketing lottery. Sometimes I figure I should just go play the lottery and I can probably be more successful playing the Mega Millions. I'm really at that point right now. Than winning the marketing lottery inside your publishing house. And so every book is different. If you are an aspiring writer, or if you have a book coming out, you should look, whatever year your book is coming out, you should find the Facebook group, debut writers 2021, debut writers 2022, debut writers 2023, on and on and on and on. And that has been a good gauge for me, a benchmark, to see what publishers do in terms of some imprints are way better at promoting their books than others. And to see when your publisher says, yeah, we're not really doing that, and then you see another publisher doing it and it's successful, you're like, maybe I should go over to that imprint next time. And I'm really in this space where we should come up with a master list of the best imprints out there.
That's a good idea. I like that idea.
Because right now we're at a disadvantage thinking like, oh, but
if we take the power, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm lucky that I went to business school for undergrad, and my background was in marketing communications, in the financial sector, and then in the nonprofit sector, and the arts. And I did the arts also. And so I didn't realize I would be my full-time marketing person, but I am. And it's been a learning curve because I have pulled away from social media because it's so toxic. And then the pandemic has thrust us back into social media. And I actually do see my efforts turning into sales and reaching new audiences, but it's also costing me money. So since the book has come out, I think I've invested about $2,500 in actual marketing and advertising, but doing it in an organic way that it doesn't look like I'm doing ads. And that's the new big thing. And in terms of finding audiences, the word on the literary street is new audiences and new readers are on Instagram and YouTube. You can harness Facebook to a degree, I think, in private groups. They've worked. YouTube, but I don't want to be a YouTuber. I don't put too much energy in Twitter. The word is that Twitter does not result in book sales at a very high level. And TikTok, depending on your genre, and if you can get like a 20-year-old to cry for your book, it goes viral. But I really can't handle TikTok. I really can't. And I'm like, TikTok, do TikTok, Keisha. And I'm like, I'm like, can I go on TikTok and cry? So that's some of where I am right now. And, if anybody wants to chit chat about stuff that I've been doing, because I'm also learning along the way. And the one thing that Random House has done for me is they'll look at my sort of insights, like what some of my posts are doing that I've paid for, and advertising and marketing will let me know if they're meeting benchmarks. So they've been good by responding with industry information that I don't have because I'm just a single person that hasn't been in this game beforehand. But I think there's something to it, and I'm looking for a rhythm and I'm looking for a flow, so that I can just sort of focus on my other stuff like writing.
I think for me, I'm the wrong guy for this question. I'm not even on any social media. It's not my bag, but I like readings. I think readings are great because you can connect with people. And so readings at bookstores, reading series like this wonderful series. I'm interested in school visits, if there's any teachers here, because of course the book is talking about sports and violence and collision sports and those sorts of things and addiction. So, I kind of like to talk with people about the issues of the book and then maybe about the book or about writing as well. So I'm trying to just kind of do in-person stuff, but that's likely not the best way to sell tons of books, but you know.
Just to let you know, Jeff, the other thing that I've done is teamed up with like indie bookstores and events. In-person events are the way you sell. But because of the pandemic, we've all been forced on Zoom, and Zoom is not a big seller, but I see it as seeds. All right, everyone, we're going to get into a grass metaphor here. Every event that I do or that we do, you get a few seeds, and those seeds at some point may read the book and then pass it on, because what my marketing team has told me, and what everyone has told me, and even the booksellers, that word of mouth is still king and queen of book sales.
People like the recommendation. They like to hear somebody else liked it. And they're like, okay, maybe I'll like it then. I trust this person. And I feel like that's the one thing that's lasted all these years in terms of marketing. That's actually key.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, I think I remember when I had a first deal, I just assumed a publicist would take care of everything, and that was an error. And learning that you really have to take the reins yourself. Sometimes it's like what you were talking about. There's a lottery, and a book just gets like plucked, and that book is the big book, and then it takes off, and you have a million people behind you and everything. But the likelihood that that's going to be yours is slim. And if you have the drive, you know, it's a lot of time and it's a lot of work, and it's doing it so you don't come off as like you're annoying about it and it's such a pain in the ass. You know, it's awful. But it's a part of the game. And you know, the ultimate goal is that you want your next book published, and your next one, you want this to actually be a career. So like, I think the seed metaphor is perfect. You know, you're laying these seeds not just for this one, but potentially for the next one as well. You know, and yeah, like, have your friends do videos of it and post on different networks and stuff. I haven't tried TikTok. I have a YA book, and I'm like, maybe I should try TikTok.
Yes.
I don't know.
So much work, but yes, and I swear, the to go viral, to get like a bestseller, the formula right now is if you can get a book talker. It's book talk now.
Book talker on TikTok.
On TikTok, it's called Book Talk for the book folks now. And if you can get a book talker to cry over some aspect of your book, it sells thousands. Like, literally, you're a bestseller within like 2 weeks.
Really, that's very good to know. I had no idea, so that's super helpful.
Anybody with kids, anybody who has a teen, get them on TikTok and have them cry over your book.
That's my goal.
Pay someone to do that.
Use the kids. Use the kids. Does anybody have any last questions or last thoughts? I hope some of that information, I think we gave you all some really good information. So I think it was super helpful. Again, a huge thanks to our readers, Leila, Jeff, and Keisha. Thank Dixon Place for letting us do this for this last nuts year. And we really hope to see you back in person in the fall. Maybe, you know, I saw somebody post, I think it was your mom camp, that she would miss the virtual readings. Maybe we'll add a virtual reading like once a year just to throw it in the mix, so people who don't live in New York City could be a part of it. But our focus will be in person, trust. And again, thanks to everybody, and hope everybody has a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to us, showing up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
It's nice to meet you. Yeah.